Hello, this is Motor City Hamilton, and let's build a Prodigy Diff together. This will be my second one, so bear with me as I'm still kind of learning these as well. But just thought it'd be good to put one together on camera, put this out there. Just a few things I thought about outside of the directions, right? So I first started by cleaning all of the parts. So I just used an electric motor cleaner, electric parts cleaner, and cleaned everything. I also oiled these bearings with just a little light, high-speed bearing oil. And then I also measured these shims to make sure I had the 0.1 separated from the 0.2. So when you follow the instruction, you know which one is which, right? I also don't like to use the, I think the instructions show that you fill this halfway full of fluid, and I really prefer to use the kingpin greases, right? So 5 or 15, 10 and 5 is what I have here. I built this first one using 15, and for the GTR, I think it feels pretty good. So I think I'm going to start with the 15K. But for my GT12, I'm gonna do 10. So we'll build this one with 10, and I'll show you what I do to build them. So you don't have to fill these at all. You just have to get them greased up enough that they're acting more like the kingpins than a full of oil type of thing. Okay, so let's start. I find the easiest way to put this bearing in. So the other thing I did is I made this little block. I drilled a little hole so I can stand it up. It's going to make the build a lot easier to be able to have a little block of wood to hold this thing up. But the first thing I do is I'm going to put on one of the small bearings, and then that needs to go into the housing. And it's so much easier to use that to put that bearing in there. The next is to build the outside of this. I want to put a little bit of grease on any of these rubber surfaces, right? So any of these O-rings, I want to make sure that that they aren't just put on dry. So I sort of put this thing on, part way here, and then behind it, I am gonna dab some of this 10K grease into here so that it's got some lubrication. You don't want this stuff to run dry. So let's push that together. Squish it around a little. And then I also want, because those washers go on the outside here, so the a 0.2 and a 0.1 shim go outside of here to hold all this together. So I'm actually going to put this too so that the shim is actually lubricated as well. So I need a 0.2. It says you put that on first. And a 0.1. Okay. And then the next step is to put on this flanged piece. So this slides with the kind of the ridge towards the gearing housing here. And you have to line up these two holes. And then there's 3 of these chrome pins. You want one of the short ones because this has to sit inside your axle bearing that's in that purple tube. The trick to this is you have to get it lined up, but the other thing you have to do is you have to sort of push down on this race. You have to push them together. There's a little bit of pressure from the O-ring. So I sort of started it like that, and then I sort of put it down like this. And you want to get it centered, and so you're going to need to push it a little bit because it's not totally centered, if you can see there. It sort of sticks out a little bit on this side. So the easiest way I found is to put it back on my block and sort of push this down. Push down on that flanged piece until you can get it to move a little bit. This is probably one of the harder things about putting it together, is this little piece right here. My other one was a little easier than this. All right, I have to admit that one went in way harder than the first one I did. But I was able to, again, put this piece on the board, press down like this, and then get that wiggled in so that it's centered across there. If it's not centered, I'm not sure if the bearing's gonna go on over that. So, because the bearing sits inside of that on your rear axle. Okay, let's go to the next steps. Again, this handy hole that I've made in the block of wood helps a ton. And the back side of this is now complete. So again, make sure you lube up that O-ring and make sure all that moves freely, right? The next step is to assemble the other side of the housing. So a very similar thing. I like to use this piece with that bearing. It goes in from this side with the splines, right? So the gears go inside with these splines that hold the other gears. So that usually helps that jump on there really easily. The other thing I'm going to do then is the O-ring again. Again, don't put that on all the way. You want to put some lubrication in there so that you don't have it dry and sticky. And then I'm going to put lubrication on the outside against those washers too. All right, this calls for a 2mm. Remember I measured these beforehand. And a 0.2 and a 0.1. Okay, so let's do the gears. For each of the gears, I want to make sure I get some lubrication inside each of them. So I'm using just a tiny screwdriver. And then I just put a little bit of coating on the gear itself. You can also do this once it's in the housing a little bit too, but the ones that you're putting in right now, these will sort of bottom out. They won't touch the other gear that's already inside there. That's the axle shaft. These sit above it. So again, make sure you've got a little bit on these. You don't have to overdo it, just enough to. So I've got 3 gears that are on the splines themselves, and then these 3 gears just sort of sit in here, and it comes together when you put that other piece on the top. Getting messy now. So these gears you want to push all the way down because they're going to seat against that other center gear. So see how that one pushed in a little bit further? And see, I'm just doing kind of a little dab here. Maybe that's a good way to put that in there. And I'm going to turn this again and try to get that one to drop all the way in. There it goes. All right, again, I'm still learning. Looks like if I put it on there, on the end of the wrench, it'll be easier to put down in here. And I'm gonna turn this, make sure it seats in. And I'm getting grease everywhere, but we'll wipe that off in a minute. Okay, so all 6 gears are in. The next is it says in the instructions to fill it to the halfway point. I'm not gonna do that because I'm using the Kingpin grease, I'm using the 10K. So all we need to do at this point, we need to make sure to lubricate inside this gear, because those two pieces will meet and there's a lot of friction there, right? So I'm going to be pretty liberal about that. And then this whole unit now just slides in. And these go into those gears that are sunken down in further. Ah, I missed a step. Again, first time I'm building, right? I'm probably making this look more complicated than it needs to be, but again, it's first time through. All right, so an O-ring, luckily my finger's already greasy, so I'm gonna go ahead and use some of that on this O-ring. You don't ever wanna put anything in dry, right? So this O-ring goes around the outside. There's a little race for it to sit in right there, and it just gently sits on there, right? That's it. Now again, line these splines up with the loose gears in the transmission, and then slide that together. So we're ready for screws. It's that simple. Again, I made it look more complex than I think it really is. Now I don't tighten these yet. I want to get all three in. So I'm just getting them down to right above it. And you want to treat this like any other, you know, tightening up tires on a streetcar. You want to go crossed, right? And I'm just sort of finger tight and then a little tighter and a little tighter, just so that I'm giving one last crank there at the end. Okay, well, let's clean it up, because got a lot of grease on it as I was fumbling around with it there. Okay, at that point, I'm just gonna double check and make sure it's smooth. Yeah, it feels pretty good. Okay, let's assemble the hub side. So 12 scale hub slides on with this sort of back side. So the thread's closest to the gear diff. So you have this piece sticking out here that the 12 scale tire is gonna slide on top of. So that's the right orientation. And then there's a hole in this that goes through, and a slot in the axle as well. And you need the long silver post. I find it's easier. It goes through in this direction. It's easier to work from the opposite side of that thread. So if you come over to this side, and again, this is similar to the other one, that there's a little bit of pressure needed here. So you have to push this hub down a bit. So I'm gonna put the axle on my plate again, and I'm gonna line this up, and I'm gonna press down towards it a little bit, and see, and it just slots right in. So get this centered. And it's that easy. Okay. So a little bit of Loctite then on this set screw. There's a set screw that goes in the end. I like to use just a touch of blue on this thing. You don't need a lot. It's not a high stress area. Just gonna hold that little cotter pin in there. Okay. I think that's it. That's this side. Let's do the left side of the hub. So the left side has this extra sleeve, because the bearing to get onto the backside here needs to slide over all of that. So this increases it up to be a 1/4 inch to fit the rear axles. And this takes the short cotter pin, this little chrome buggy here, and there's no pressure on this one, so this one just slide right in. It also just fall right out too if you don't have the set screw in, so just be kind of careful. Again, get it in there and get it centered. And then we're gonna do the same thing and put just a touch of blue Loctite on this. That's a little too much. Let's dab some off. Again, make sure it's centered. I think that is diff assembled. That is. So people have asked about gearing. I usually run a 60. So if we slide this on and look at a 60, I've got a lot of room, a lot of threads left. In comparison, this is my Awesomatics. Look at how close, like a 60 is the smallest I can go, and not have the pinion hit. Without, then I can go to a 58 or a 56, but I have to be careful that my pinion isn't sticking out too far this way, because it'll hit that casing. And motors can move around a little bit, so you got to be careful and get that aligned correctly. But with this, I've got a lot more room here. All the weight is more to the center of this one than the Awesomatics. So that was a 60. This is a 55. This is the smallest I have. And I still see threads around the outside. I don't know what the smallest they make is, but I'm sure you could go even smaller if you could find it. But that's a 55, and look at how much room is around the edge of that by the threads, right? And just for reference, here's a 62, right? And then here's a 68 tooth, right? I use 60, so I'm going to put the 60 on here. They recommend that you use these low profile screws. See how they don't bubble out. They're not rounded on the end, they're flat. And any gear that's a TC style gear will mount right up on this. Again, I don't tighten the first one down all the way, just like you would on a real car. You're supposed to tighten your lugs across, so we're going to tighten these kind of together. So I'm just sort of loosely putting them in here. I don't want to warp the gear. If you tighten down just one and crank it all the way down, you're chancing warping the gear. So I just sort of just touch them so they just get there, and then I go, give them their crank. Okay. All right. That's that. Diff assembled. All right, let's check some weights on these. So the Prodigy gear diff weighs 23 grams. Awesomatics gear diff, same gear on it, weighs 22 grams. So 1 gram difference in weight. And I think all that's made up for, though, by, remember how close this is to the gear versus how much the weight is more internal, right? The closer you put the weight to the axle, the less rotating mass it has, the less it takes to accelerate. So about the same weight, but the weight is closer to the axle, so that should be an advantage. I've already weighed, I don't have gears on these right now, but I weighed these before with gears on them. So just for reference, the axle that comes with the car, the kit steel axle, is 13 grams with the same gear mounted on it. And then the lightweight axle is 9 grams with the same gear on it. So if you think about that, like anytime I can run the lightweight axle, I'm gonna run it. If the track is grippy enough and the car's not doing that kick out sideways on exit, I'm gonna try to run the lightweight axle, right? Because that's a pretty big difference in weight there. We're talking about quite a step from acceleration and mass there. But anytime I get to a track where the track is a little bit green, a new layout, or some of those tracks you go to where maybe it's like, there's really good grip in some areas. Maybe they run oval and road course and they have really good grip in some areas and a little slippery in others. I'm going to put this in and make my day a little easier and take the weight out of the car somewhere else to keep it weight. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and I'll keep doing more of these. Thanks for listening and look forward to talking to you guys online. Take care.